let me make just an announcement here. Hey, today is Tuesday, March the 15th. And we'd like to welcome everybody that's watching on the webcast tonight. Also would like to welcome any of our shortwave listeners. So, hang on a second. We got a call coming in. All I got to do is find it here. Hey, Rich, how you doing?
All right, how are you?
Doing good. We had an internet. I don't know if you saw. We've been having an internet outage. We're just getting the show started.
Okay.
Now,
all right. You want to call me back then when you're ready to go?
You can stay on if you want to. Although I've got a still picture with you.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you know why your camera's not? Why we have a still picture?
Oh, let me see. Oh, I see myself here. Let's see. All right.
Can you wiggle your ears?
Yeah. How about that? Howdy.
Well, I'm getting a clock now. I tell you what, I'll try to call you back in about 20 minutes or so.
Sure. That sounds good.
All right.
Same
here.
Very good. Bye.
Okay, so let's start over again. Again, I was welcoming all of our shortwave listeners. I know there's a lot of static crashes tonight. I tried listening on 5030 earlier, and boy, we had some major static crashes out here. And the fact that we didn't even get the show started until about 8:20, the guys at the board ops at the radio station may have thought we were not going to be on tonight, and so I don't even know if we're on tonight or not. But we usually have a viewer down in Costa Rica that sends us an email every week that listens to the show, so he can tell us if he heard it this week. Anyway, we're on shortwave station WBCQ 5130 kilohertz out of Monticello, Maine. And again, if you're on shortwave, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email to Tom at W5KUB, Tom at W5KUB.com. We'd love to hear from you. And let's see what other announcements I had. We're getting ready for the big ham venture coming in about 8 weeks. We'll talk more about that. I put a post out on Facebook today. I've got an idea about an old-timer show. We want to have an old-timer show. Anybody that's been a ham 50 years or longer. I'm looking for hams that have been around 50, 60, 70 years. We want to talk about those good old days. And we'd love to have some of those guys on the show with us one night and just have a good round table and talk about that. Tonight, though, we're going to talk about the Amateur Radio Parity Act. I'm not an expert on it, but I tell you, I know the man is the expert on it, and he's with us tonight, and that's Frank Howell, K4FMH. And maybe Frank will give us a lot of the background on this. Frank is actually the person that got the senator to, I guess, submit this bill in Congress, I believe, and he can talk more about that later. Now, I do have the ARRL video. It's about 5 minutes, Frank, that we can show in the beginning, in the beginning or in the middle or at the end or wherever you want to do.
Why don't we lead off with it, because I think that sets it up well.
Okay, so we're going to do the video, and let me see if I can run the video. Now, Frank, you're not going to hear the audio. I'm sorry, but you're not going to hear the audio, but all our viewers will hear it. So here we go.
You may have heard about the Amateur Radio Parity Act, and we wanted to take some time to dispel some myths about the legislation. But first, let's start by telling you a little bit about what amateur radio is. Amateur radio is two-way communication that allows operators, or hams, to send voice and data over radio waves. Because amateur radio requires virtually no infrastructure, it keeps working after your computer, cell phone, and television stop working. In emergencies, amateur radio is an invaluable national asset. But don't take our word for it. Listen to Craig Fugate, the head of FEMA.
As much as we think we're sophisticated with technology, things break. Seeing how amateur radio, in a disaster, in a crisis, was oftentimes the one thing that was still up and running.
ARRL signed an updated Memorandum of Understanding with FEMA just last year to assist in national crises. ARRL has similar agreements with the Salvation Army and the American Red Cross. Amateur radio operators are available and prepared to assist in a disaster. And this army of federally licensed ham radio operators provide these services for free. That's good for the taxpayer, and that's good for America. So what does the Amateur Radio Parity Act do? While amateur radio doesn't need much infrastructure, it does require some sort of outdoor antenna. And increasingly, deed-restricted communities across the country use cookie-cutter prohibitions of any outdoor radio antennas. There's no problem if you live where zoning is under the jurisdiction of municipal zoning laws. Since 1985, when Ronald Reagan's FCC created a three-part test that prevents local governments from outright bans of amateur radio antennas, local governments have to give some reasonable accommodation to amateur radio. The local government can still regulate what best fits their community. This has worked beautifully for over 30 years. But if an amateur radio operator lives in a deed-restricted community, chances are they have no access to any antenna of any size because they are banned outright, even when the antenna is nothing more than a piece of wire that is impossible to see. And the number of deed-restricted communities has exploded since the 1980s. Today it is virtually impossible to buy a home that was built after 1985 that isn't subject to an HOA. And that is why the Amateur Radio Parity Act is necessary. It takes the time-tested, 30-year-old reasonable accommodation standard and applies it to deed-restricted communities. Unfortunately, there is a smear campaign against this legislation, and we need to respond to these blatant lies. This bill will not lead to giant radio towers in every backyard in America. Each neighborhood is different, so each HOA will regulate what best fits their community, because what works for suburban Los Angeles won't necessarily work in rural Kansas, so a one-size-fits-all approach just won't work. The Amateur Radio Parity Act doesn't take away any jurisdiction from HOAs or impact or negate HOA agreements. HOAs, not hams, will decide on height and placement of radio antennas. The Amateur Radio Parity Act is not heavy-handed. The 1996 Telecommunications Act removed the ability for communities to regulate over-the-air television broadcast antennas and satellite dishes. Homeowners can install satellite dishes or TV antennas, and there is nothing HOAs can do to stop them. Our bill does nothing like this. Amateur radio operators in these communities just want a seat at the table to negotiate a reasonable accommodation from HOAs. But HOAs don't want there to even be a table, and instead just continue to give a blanket no. The ARRL thinks there is plenty of common ground to be found between HOAs and amateur radio operators to make sure that all of our communities are prepared when disaster strikes.
When Katrina knocked out communication services on the coast, amateur radio operators provided many people their only contact to the outside world. Today, Senator Roger Wicker thanked the operators who played a critical role during the disaster.
It's a good opportunity for us to thank the amateur radio operators for their role in helping the public and helping to save lives.
Senator Wicker is co-sponsoring the Amateur Radio Parity Act. It would urge the FCC to ease restrictions so more people can set up amateur radio stations in communities that ban them.
What we don't want is just a blanket prohibition of amateur radios.
And these blanket prohibitions prevent hams from practicing their craft and being ready to provide communications assistance in an emergency.
And you got to be prepared. And amateur radio is always that last mile system when everything else fails. A ham transmitting can mean the difference between life and death.
We hope this provides some level of clarity on amateur radio parity, and we hope that you will support the Amateur Radio Parity Act, because opposing reasonable accommodation is just unreasonable. Learn more at arrl.org and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, Frank. That video was a fairly simple video, and I think it was put together not as much for hams, but to educate the general public about this problem.
You are absolutely correct in that, and part of it was to negate or attempt to negate what the lobby group, the CAI in California, was putting out. As you would expect most any lobbying effort to do, they're going to put out some things that may not be very accurate, but it's going to shade things in their point of view to achieve their political ends. Why don't we start just very briefly, Tom, by my giving just a little bit of a sense of how we got here with this legislation, on the back of that. Some years ago, the FCC adopted regulations that, frankly, were put in place to keep cable television from really becoming the only provider of television. And you could see this with apartment complexes some 20 years ago as they would say, hey, we don't want a lot of those traditional antennas out there, so we've got a cable vendor and we're going to lock you into that. Well, the FCC said no, that the OTARD is the acronym, OTARD, which allows over-the-air transmissions of radio and television, whether it's the traditional Yagi antenna or other, bow tie type of antenna, or the small type of satellite dish, not the big large one, but the small type, the kind of pizza size one, DirecTV and Dish, or simply two of the more common versions of that. So we have a predecessor set of regulations by the FCC, which protected everyone, hams and non-hams alike, from a housing authority, and by that simply a landlord or another group who would control through private contracts, such as HOA communities, how we can receive TV. And, we Americans, we love our TV. And so if we didn't have that FCC ruling in OTARD, we could see, for example, neighborhoods getting a little bit of a kickback from Comcast, AT&T, any of the cable TV providers to say, hey, we'll give you 10% of what everybody in your neighborhood spends with us if you'll make sure they can only work with us. Well, the FCC came in and put that to bed. No, everyone can put a pizza dish and get line of sight to satellites or over the air. Now that's with just common, TV and radio. So now let's deal with amateur radio. Well, I think certainly Katrina kicked this off and underscored, and then the subsequent hurricanes and tornadoes that wreaked such devastation really underscored to the federal government just how important we are. And we sort of proved our mettle to what then became Homeland Security. Well, there were these problems with HOA governed neighborhoods where it's private. Rules and regulations about what kind of brick you might use, what color your windows could be, what kind of shingles you can have. In the neighborhood I live in, my wife and I, there is only one type of brick that you can build a house with. Now, we happen to like that, but anyway, it's still a restriction. And the problem that the FCC faced was there was this clamoring about, wait a minute, there are a lot of these deed-restricted rules that simply say you can have no aerials of any type. Well, now, Tom, the problem with that, we have something called the Equal Protection Clause. That is, if you have a regulation, whether it be through public or private contract, then everyone who comes under that contract must be treated equally, equal protection. And so when you look at a statement that says no aerials of any type in a deed-restricted neighborhood, okay, that would block amateur radio. But what else would it block? It would block cell phones. It would block Wi-Fi. It would block remote garage door openers, and so on and so on. But the problem is amateur radio operators would have to go to court and fight that battle individually. So the FCC had a little pressure just a few years ago to take a good look at this. And with all due respect, they kind of sort of looked at it. You know, they had other issues to face, like all the money over broadband development and the movement of television from analog to digital spaces, and then the new bandwidth that was freed up. And that, you know, since President Reagan and the shift in the shift in commercial broadcasting, and the kinds of things where you can own multiple stations in markets, and you can have a newspaper and a TV and several radio stations and so on, we've had some dramatic changes, and they've all been associated with increasing amounts of money. So the FCC has had a lot of pressure on it to really focus on broadband development. So, you know, the issues that amateur radio operators face, you know, they just aren't that important to the FCC. They're important, but they're not that important. And so here the FCC looked at it. They made a decision that said, well, it's really up to Congress. We don't see compelling issues that will push us to make changes in Part 97, and so we're going to leave it to Congress. Well, Congress then acted, and 2 sessions ago, there was the initial Amateur Radio Parity Act in the House, and it did not get out of committee, but the American Radio Relay League didn't stop with that, and so got that resubmitted by Representative Kinzinger. The problem was that you got to have a bill in both parts of Congress. You got to have one in the House and in the Senate. And at the time, I was working as an assistant director for the Delta Division. I was a kind of a low-level flunky for Dade Norris over in Arkansas, who's the Delta Division chairman and director. And it occurred to me when I realized that Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, the junior senator from my state, was chair of the Senate subcommittee that provides oversight over the FCC. You know, it just sort of hit me like a bolt of lightning. Wait a minute. This is the person in the Senate who should lead on this. So this gave me pause as one of his constituents to call his office and find out who was his chief of staff with regard to telecommunications. And that person used to work for the Federal Communications Commission. And so Senator Wicker hired someone from inside the FCC to come to his staff to advise him on how the FCC works from the inside. And Crystal Tully is that person. And I spent some time with her on the phone and talked about the issues and gave her some encouragement that Senator Wicker really should lead on this nationally, given his subcommittee chairmanship. And I asked her a couple of questions that made a big difference. And I asked her, you know, Crystal, if you have any other rank and file issue that comes in the form of a lobbyist, how many people are affected? And she had a quick response. Well, Frank, not nearly as many as 5,500, which is the number of licensed hams in the state of Mississippi. And so we went from there, that from a position of strength, this is something that should get a fair hearing. And so I contacted Kay Craigie, then president of the ARL, and together we got Senator Wicker's staff to meet with lobbyists, Chris Imlay and others, for the league. And very quickly, within a couple of weeks, the Senate bill, 1685, was submitted in the Senate. Now, 1301 is the one that gets a lot of PR because it's been in the House, and this is its second time around. And 1301 has been reported out of the subcommittee to the committee that would deal with that. And Adam Kinzinger is a representative in Illinois who is the sponsor of that bill. It has over 100 co-sponsors. Very few pieces of legislation will get that many co-sponsors. Now, in the Senate,
Frank, where is it now, and what has to be done next?
Well, in the House, it's gone from a subcommittee to its committee. And, they have some committees are so large and they're so multi-focused that they have subcommittees to deal with certain specific things. And so 1301 in the House has gone to the full committee. And there have been hearings on it. It was a split vote, but it has gone to the full committee. So it will be what's called marked up and have some changes perhaps made to it. Now, in the Senate, it's already left the entire committee and is before the Senate itself. So Senator Wicker's bill, 1685, is a little bit ahead of the House bill. That's not unusual. That's House and Senate sort of play by different rules and things. So it is getting a fair hearing. The Senate and the House have a YouTube channel, and one can go look at the replays of some of those hearings. We've had some concern from a senator in California who I'm sure was lobbied very heavily by the HOA industry lobby group, CAI. And there are a couple of others who may have recommended, well, let's just make it optional. Well, if it's optional, then it won't happen. Now that's where it's at. And what's important, Tom, and I want to take a little breath here, is that's where it's at. The governmenttrack.us is a website that tracks all bills in the House and the Senate. They give the House bill a 10% chance of becoming law. They give the Senate bill 30% chance of becoming law. I wouldn't place a lot of, being a statistician, I wouldn't place a lot of emphasis on those probabilities. There are some reasons why this piece of legislation would get a vote up or down, and that's sort of where we are. What I'd like to do.
We need that. I think. I'm just wondering if we're looking at 6 months or a year, or if this is something you think it happened pretty quick.
6 months is clearly a window that I think we can look at. Now, what's really important about it now? And hams are like other people's. We have debates over. In local government as to whether or not cameras should be used to do traffic citations. They're big money makers for a lot of cities. They take those pictures, and Tom, they'll get our tag number if we go on a stale yellow through a red light and so on and so on.
I've had one of those. It's a nice color picture.
And I bet Memphis has a number of them. And the reason I bring that up is that those kinds of issues are not fundamentally different from the issue that we're facing. What we don't do as hams, by and large, is actually read the bill. I want to briefly summarize what the bill says so we can deal with what it does not say, okay?
Okay.
It has 3 parts. It's a very simple bill. I've stayed in a Holiday Inn Express with some lawyers once, but I'm not a lawyer. I do work with some who do real estate law, and I do get a lot of advice on this. There are 3 parts of it. In Part 97, in Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations, that's where we live as hams. It simply says that any private land use restriction, including a restrictive covenant, that 1, precludes amateur radio communications or fails to reasonably accommodate such communications, or number 3, does not constitute the minimum practicable restriction on such communications, is not valid. It can't preclude. It can't just say no. And 2, it must use reason. And I'll talk about what that means because that's key. It must use a reasonable accommodation in not saying no. And 3, it has to at least give in that reasonable accommodation the minimal practicable restriction. Let me give you an example. Most of us use cell phones, but what if cell phone towers were not as advanced in their development as they are today? And let's just say that everyone would have to go outdoors, out in their yard to get a cell phone signal. Oh, but then your HOA says it doesn't look good for our neighborhood. for people running outdoors with a cell phone. So you can only talk on your phone between 10 and 11 in the morning and 2 and 3 in the afternoon. Can you imagine the hue and cry there would be from the rank and file citizen at that kind of deed restriction? That would go away very quickly if that kind of restriction were the case. Why? Well, it's not reasonable to restrict cell phone communications that way.
Well, you know,
now,
Frank,
go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? Here's my problem with this. That language. I mean, it's nice that we're trying to say you got to be reasonable and you got to, you got to look at this thing. But my problem is, what is the real definition of reasonable? They can still tell you no. I think, can't they?
No, they cannot say no. So, see, that's what point number one. You cannot preclude the communication. Now, let me tell you the trap. If there was a definition, the bill wouldn't get through Congress because everyone would have an object. You know, it's the statistician drowned in a tub with an average of 6 inches of water. You know, if we came up with an average antenna solution, then everyone would have a problem with it. So the beauty of this is exactly what you're having a problem with. And let me try to explain why that is the beauty of it. What fits in one area may not fit in another. So what is reasonable means you can't just put it in writing in boilerplate from a consulting attorney and just say no amateur radio communications or no antennas. You have to sit down and you have to walk through. I've got to have some kind of antenna. Federal law says so. So we have that with the dishes and over-the-air antennas with OTAR.
So Frank, is it going to have to go into some kind of litigation with a lawyer?
No.
Like, okay, here's example. I want to work 40 meters, and I want to put up not a big tower, just 40 feet and a nice tri-bander 4-element on top. And the homeowners say, well, you can make, another antenna would be a piece of small wire on a little antenna tuner that's not noticeable. So they're saying, we're reasonable. We're letting you get on with that antenna. We don't want you to have a tower. Who's going to make those decisions? Who's going to make those decisions on what is reasonable?
Well, now let me ask you. Are you being unreasonable by insisting that the only way you can get on 40 meters is with a tower?
Well, possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And so,
I see that.
Here's the thing. You're moving the chess piece from you can't move it. That pawn can't be moved. Okay, we're going to let you move that pawn. But, in chess, we have a restriction on how far you can move that piece. So what's the minimum practicable restriction? What's the minimum antenna that it would take you to work 40 meters? So
would the homeowner association make that decision and say, we made a decision, we think it's reasonable for you to have a wire and an auto tuner?
You probably would have very few homeowners associations who would have the technical knowledge to come up with that. Okay. However, I think if you're told, no, we just don't think a tower will fit in this neighborhood, would you come back then with a dipole, for example, or, a wire beam or something that you described, something that, you can barely see?
Yeah, and I guess you would if you didn't sit down and do it during that first meeting. And sure, if you want to get on the air, sure. I think you would come back and say, okay, you're not going to let me have a beam, but I want to put a 40-meter dipole up between this tree and this tree on my lot.
Well, Tom, do you buy cars?
Sometimes.
Do you always give the salesperson what they ask for?
No,
on a sticker?
Not always.
Right. And so you sit down and you're reasonable. That is to the point where in the car dealer transaction, you can't get up and walk and go to another dealer. Now that's, you could get up and move to another neighborhood. But, you sit down and negotiate.
Well, and I see what you're saying here. I think the bill does provide some help to hams to get on the air. Now let's talk just practical things here.
Right.
Somebody, and I know you're in a very tough homeowner association here. We'll talk a little about your antennas in a minute. You know, I've been in one the last couple of years. I had a tower at my other place, but this homeowner association really is getting old, and they're not enforcing anything. They're about to let it expire. But if I'm correct here, and I think I heard on the video, there are some homeowner associations that, I mean, they won't even let you put a wire up, even if you can't see it.
Well, and today, okay, now there are two things that can happen today without this bill. Some homeowners associations, and I can think of one in Starkville, Mississippi, that allowed a tower to go up. It's about a 50-foot tower, just like you described. And, you know, they looked at it and said, well, it's not that bad. Now, that's probably a rare HOA board, okay? I would have, but it does happen. Now, on the flip side, they might say no wire at all. Well, that's where we are. They now can say none. And all this bill does is move it away.
Yeah, it takes the none out. It takes the none out and gives you an opportunity.
Exactly. So I guess the argument here is this. And, you know, I look, by the way, I'm in an HOA neighborhood. And tongue in cheek, I look at a 55-foot mast with a radio antenna on it every day, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Why is that? How could that be? It's on a yacht, and it's got a marine radio on it. But that's seen as okay. Now, amateur radio is viewed differently. So what HOAs are not fully rational.
Yeah.
And that is, they don't articulate why. They have this, what I call the Herman Munster view of amateur radio. You know, it's mysterious. It's going to mess up your TV, and we don't want none of that here. Plus, our lawyer, when we put this together, put that boilerplate in there. And very often, the people who enforce these things had nothing to do with their writing.
Well,
but today, no can be the private agreement of the land. Now, the only thing we can do today is that, in my opinion, is that equal protection issue. If you say no aerials of any type or no transmissions of any type, then you try to make the HOA live up to that and block all cell phone uses, Wi-Fi, remote garage door openers, because that's what they are. But that costs money, and you do get very litigious. So this bill, even though you raised the first question out of the chute, of it doesn't define what's reasonable. There's not a definition in a metric of a size antenna that's reasonable. Right. Reasonable here, and this is so important, it's the process used by which to discuss it.
Yeah, Dave, AC2BA says a big vertical flagpole would be good. Now, you got some experience with that, don't you?
You bet. And there's a couple of things that we can do. There's actually some additional law, and I think Florida was one of the first states to put in the so-called flagpole patriot type laws, which said you want to be a good American and fly that flag, and boy, nobody can keep you from doing it. However, you know what HOAs can do?
Well, I guess they can tell you can't fly a flag too.
No. In those states where you have that legislation, but they can tell you can only put it on a 3-foot stick on as opposed to the flagpole that we want to hire that. We want to put that hustler vertical in.
Yeah.
And but very often though, and you think about it for a moment, if you went in after this law were in place and they're expecting you to say tower, and you present some pictures. And Photoshop can do this easily. I've done this. You put that in your yard and show, what it's going to look like and all that. Very often, that disarms that HOA. Here's another one. You know that martins like birdhouses that are high off the ground. Martins eat mosquitoes. And here in the South, with the Zika virus and with all these other kind of transmissional diseases, having a birdhouse on, say, an 18-foot PVC pole that just might have a hustler vertical in the middle of it, sometimes mine passed muster. Now, look, between you and me, I got a secret I want to tell. Mine got blocked by my XYL, so I didn't put my birdhouse up, although my HOA approved it. Right. So what I'm doing is I have antennas in my attic, and I have a large attic, and we built a home about 3 years ago. And so I've got some space, and I've got probably 5 antennas up in my attic, and I'm making, lemonade out of lemons. And so what a lot of hams don't, when you see them post on websites, oh man, I'd never move to an HOA. Boy, I'd hate to be married to that person his hobby is going to totally dictate and dominate, where we choose to live.
Well, I tell you, HOAs are getting to be more and more, and almost everywhere you move to now has them. You got to really watch it if you're a ham. And now at my last home, and again, I didn't put my tower back up at my last home. I didn't think I needed it. I put wire antennas. That didn't ask anybody anything. But I think over there the rule was you could put an antenna or a tower up as long as it was no more than 10 feet above the roof of the house. Now, that house was, 2-story. It had a full walk-in third attic, so it was probably 35 feet high. So, I could have probably put a 45-foot tower up there, but I chose not to. But some will restrict it totally. You can't do it at all. So and hey, they're getting to where they can enforce this stuff. If you do something, I think they can put a lien on your house now. If you sign up and buy that house, that's part of the agreement.
They can fine you, and here's here's some issues. HOAs are not all alike.
That's right.
I mean, some are very, very large. Some are corporations. My son is the president of his HOA in Northport, Alabama. He's an assistant golf coach at University of Alabama. He lives in a suburb north Tuscaloosa. And so he's getting a lot of these experiences where you've got, a bass fisherman might want to buy one of those mailboxes that looks like a bass, with its mouth open, and when you open it, the tail wiggles.
Yeah.
Well, only bass fishermen will think that's attractive. I'm here to tell you. Okay, and I live on a lake myself, but you have a lot of those types of issues, and those are what those aesthetic guidelines are for. Well, some HOAs really don't have a lot of money, and so I'm very directly aware of some neighboring HOAs that have view lines that are blocked, and you've got pretty deep pocket homeowners who are suing the HOA and each other, about all this. And in one case, the HOA is thinking about just disbanding because, frankly, everybody else is going to have to pay those legal bills. So keep in mind, HOAs vary just like hams do. They vary a great deal. In my case, when we built this house, I asked if a birdhouse would be acceptable, and they said in principle yes. You'll have to apply like everything else, and they did approve an 18-foot birdhouse. My XYL didn't like the looks of it, and so quite frankly, I just decided what I would do. I have a little Wellbrook receive loop that's behind a couple of evergreen trees, and it's taped green, and you really can't see it. And if anybody says they saw it moving, I'll say they've had a martini too many. Yeah. But I have an outdoor receive loop that helps with a lot of those static crashes like we're hearing tonight. So I could get WBCQ here before we went on the air on video, very, very well. Now, I have my VHF UHF antenna. It's a vent antenna. It fits over one of the bathroom vent pipes. And the plumber who installed it came back later. He had to do a repair job on a different vent because the manufacturer had made a bad design, and they had to update another vent. So it was on my roof, and he said, hey, which one of those pipes is that antenna that I put up for you? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. And he said, why not? I said, because I'm going to call you as a witness that if the plumber who put that antenna up cannot tell it from another vent pipe, then that's prima facie evidence that you can't see that antenna, even though it's hidden in plain sight. And I'm often told that on my Aries net, that I'm the strongest signal of all the Aries team, and some are further away from the repeater than I am. So, I'm going to put up a dual band Yagi in my attic as well to try to reach a little further on some repeaters. But the bottom line is that, my situation would not necessarily fit yours, and it wouldn't necessarily fit the other person's. And so if you've got an HOA that would allow a tower of any kind, I would say you're in that upper echelon, of agreement. And, but the bottom line is right now, this bill is simple. It merely takes no off the table. We lost Nancy Reagan here recently, and she was famous for the anti-drug slogan of just say no. Well, the HOAs are the ones who really learned that phrase. And what this bill would do is take away the just say no. Now, give me a question or two, because I got to follow up, because hams are a little bit divided on this very topic. Yeah, and I want to wrestle with that in a moment.
Look at the chat room as you've been talking. A lot of people are living in HOAs right now, and as we've discussed, some others have just said they're fed up with it and they've moved out. So, guys, but before we end the segment here, are there any specific questions about HOA? We've got the man here, Frank. He can probably answer your question. So shoot us a note here in the chat room real quick, and let's see.
Here's an issue while they're typing where hams get divided. You'll get some hams who say, by George, you signed that contract and you shouldn't now try to vacate it or change it. All right, that sounds reasonable. Well, let's think for a minute. We have many other rules of which that would be a tremendous burden. For example, I mentioned my HOA. There is only one type of brick that is allowable, and it's in the deed restrictions.
Wow.
What if that brick goes out of production?
Yeah.
Then could you just not build a house? Well, that would not be, no one would say that's a good thing. Well, we have other issues, and let me give you an example. We have a neighboring HOA that's just down the road. Often HOAs get to where they reproduce themselves, that it's impossible for others to get on the HOA board. And so people feel their Wheaties, particularly those of us who are retired. You don't have anything better to do. By George, you're going to keep this. You're like White Earp. You're going to keep this neighborhood clean. It's going to be the way the CC&Rs say it's going to be. Well, why do we have those CC&Rs? Well, the main rationale is to protect property values. Well, we have a neighboring HOA that wants to dictate what kind of interior paint colors you can use. Mm. They're not even visible. Well, that goes beyond the scope of the CC&R. So one of the things that the rank and file HOA homeowner who pays HOA fees needs to get, regardless of whether they're an amateur radio operator or not, needs to make sure that the HOA board does not exceed the CC&Rs. And a little, civil resistance to that, to make sure that, because if they were to go to court, Tom, let's just say there was no CC&R against you putting up that Smiling Bass mailbox. There's no rule against it, but they said you got to take it down, and they fined you. You take it to court, 9 times out of 10, that judge is going to say the HOA has no grounds to restrict your pursuit of happiness, so to speak. So those CC&Rs are the limits of what the HOA should be able to enforce. And things change. HOAs and CC&Rs are changed all the time for various good reasons. A HOA may want to make their streets public, and they have to turn over the streets to a local government control. Well, that requires change in the CC&Rs. And I could go on, but amateur radio is not unique in this regard. There are changes that happen all the time, and this would be a good thing in my opinion. So those hams that sort of say, I learned the code and everybody ought to have to, well, FCC changed the code requirement as well, and ham radio is growing by leaps and bounds, and there are more people using CW now than probably ever were. So this would be a positive change, in my opinion, as well. And I want to say one thing, and I'm no longer an ARL official. I am a life member. I give Kay Craigie my highest possible remarks and regard for her leadership on this. This has truly been a lobbying effort, and it could be the single most important legislation involving amateur radio since the FCC dropped the code requirement. That was a very significant change. So this is something worth supporting.
I can see how this would do nothing but give benefits to ham radio operators to help them make it easier for them to operate from their home. So, and that's the important thing. You know, the service we provide, we need that capability. If you start restricting everybody across the U.S. and you can't put antennas up, wait till the big one comes, and we're going to be out of communications.
We're over 750,000 strong. Yeah. We're citizens too, and just like people that have boats and other kind of stuff they park in their driveways, hey, give us a little consideration as well.
Well, we've got some good comments in the chat room. A couple people talked about that this segment was an excellent segment. It had a lot of good information you brought, Frank. I want to shout out to one person in the chat room, M1ERS. That's Steve, over in the UK. And it's about 3:00 in the morning there right now. Steve tunes into the show every Tuesday night, and he's on here right now listening to this, and he finds it interesting. Of course, he's got a 60-foot tower up, and he's not facing these problems. But I would imagine that these kind of problems, if they don't already exist, will start existing sometime in other countries.
Well, Tom, here's what I'd say to Steve. We need to get some donations and invest in Steve's Bottomless Pint Fund.
Bottomless Pint Fund?
Yeah. A pint of ale?
Oh, okay.
If he tunes in every week from the UK at this time of the morning, we need to reward him in some fashion.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, well, Frank, let's since we got started really late, it's 9:15. Of course,
let's hear about DXing.
My clock says it's 8:15 because it hadn't changed its time yet. So, but I know it's an hour later. Let's see if we can get Rich on here. And let's jump into this Heard Island update real quick. I think there's a lot of people probably are also looking for that update tonight.
You bet.
So, Frank, hey, thanks very much. It was some good information, man. And I feel like you're the expert on the Parity Act. And if anybody
I was fortunate enough to be the constituent who made the call and request. And so I've tried to stick it through and stay with it. And I appreciate Roger Wicker. What people can do if they support this is write their congressional representatives to support this.
Yeah, and Steve over in the UK says there are some places over there that do have the same problem. So, they're starting to see it too. And I just want to tell everybody, we tried to invite Senator Wicker on the program tonight, but it was kind of short notice and he couldn't make it.
I'm still working on that, and maybe we can get him back for a Tuesday night sometime soon.
Yeah, and this is election night in all these states. Seems like we're always competing on Tuesday night with some type of election or debate. All right, well, Frank, just stand by there and just stay on the show with us. Let me see if I can get Rich on here. If I can figure out how to work this thing, get the right mouse here.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Rich, how you doing there? And Rich, is your camera working or on?
Yeah, it should be. Now it should be.
All right, we'll give it a second. Oh, there you are. Okay,
yep.
Cool.
With my souvenir hat here.
Oh, man, I like that hat, man. Oh, gee, I'm going to have to get me one of those. Let me see if I can adjust your picture a little bit here. Let me think how I can do this. Let's see. No, that won't work. Since we had so much trouble before the show, I didn't get all the camera shots set up. So let me. Well, I know what it is. I'm on split screen. I think that's what the problem is. Let's see. That's a little better. And let me adjust you in a little bit better. All right, let's see. That should make you look a lot better right there. Okay. Well, so, Rich, how's it going? And are we about to get this DXpedition going?
Yeah, they're about halfway there. They're somewhere just south of Marion Island. So they left Cape Town late Thursday afternoon Cape Town time, and they're almost halfway there. So they should be there. No, I think maybe next Tuesday. So yeah, it takes about 11 days to get there actually.
So it takes them. Let me see if it's going to work. Yeah, that kind of work. So they're about halfway there from where'd you say, Africa, South Cape Town?
Yeah, they left Cape Town, South Africa, last Thursday. They left at the end of the day Cape Town time, and now they're about halfway there, and they're just south of an island called Marion Island, which is a South African island. It's also a pretty rare DX location. But they do have, Marion Island has a scientific outpost for South Africa, but it's a sub-Antarctic island. So yeah, it's an interesting place. But they're south of that by a bit. They're trying to head straight for Heard Island. They're not making any stops along the way.
So what day will they actually arrive on the island, and what day do you think they'll start operating?
They should arrive on Tuesday, which is the 22nd, about midday, and so they'll set up right away. They may get a station or two on that day. It could be the 22nd or the 23rd for sure. Pending whatever the weather and the waves are doing on their approach. But they have those HDT tents that they inflate. And so they have a fast strike thing going where they can set things up really quick. You can get the tents up in like a half an hour. You just plug an air compressor in them and up they go. Then you just have to tie them down a little bit, but and then they have a couple antennas and a couple stations. So I'm going to guess that they'll have a couple stations on Tuesday the 22nd, nighttime their time. Let's see, if that's nighttime their time, it might mean that it's actually morning on the West Coast the next day.
Now, have you tested the satellite phone with them since they've headed down that way?
Yeah, they have two satellite phones. One is an Iridium, and the other is an Inmarsat. The Inmarsat, it really requires that you be fairly stationary. So it's not, and we knew this ahead of time. We knew that it on the boat, it's kind of difficult to try to, while they're rocking and rolling in waves, to try to keep the little antenna pointed at the satellite. So what they did do is they have an Iridium which has a sort of not a gyroscopic, but a circular polarized antenna. They have that affixed to the boat, and so that's been working. Now the Iridium we're paying for, so we don't use it too much. It's pretty expensive. But the Inmarsat, once they get there, they have 4 BGAN terminals and 2 sat phones, and we are being sponsored by Inmarsat 100% with unlimited airtime. So once they get on the island, we'll be able to start sending pictures and doing live feeds and all that kind of good stuff.
Have you tested to see if you can get Skype through it or anything like that?
I tested a number of different things, and yes, I actually used like Google Hangouts. I didn't use Skype, but I did use Google Hangouts, and that did work fine. Now, it's kind of interesting. When I tested, I set them all up, and I set them up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Ironically, they go slower in the San Francisco Bay Area because so many people are using satellites that the bandwidth ends up being throttled down a little because they have to try to give everyone a slice of time on the satellite constellation. Now, ironically, they're going to get better throughput when they're on Heard Island because there's no one competing nearby. So I guess they do some sort of, I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but it's some sort of time slicing on the bandwidth.
Yeah. Well, Rich, what we need you to do, calculate the time differences and work on a schedule, because we have talked about bringing them in on the show, our Tuesday night show. Now, if they're going to be operational on the 23rd, I think the 23rd is a Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. 23rd, the 30th will be a Tuesday, and then I guess the 7th of April. So our show is, Tuesdays, so I'm hoping that maybe on a couple of those Tuesdays, or all three if you guys want to do it, I'd love to bring you guys in, and we can use Hangout and bring your video in if Dr. Bob or somebody can, show us the blizzard going on behind and, give us a report on how things are going. And I think it'd just be exciting.
Yeah, well, we definitely would love to do it. I'm just looking at a map right now that has the gray line, has the sunrise, sunset. Here's the good news. The good news is they're going to be in daylight when this show is on, so that's really cool. It's going to be their morning,
right?
So it's right now. It's tomorrow morning there. So actually, what that means is because obviously. Having video with daylight will be a lot better than having to do it, with a small incandescent lamp inside the tent. So that's good.
And it should give some great contrast, because I'm looking at the gray line map as well, and it ought to be just great video.
Yeah, I think so, because then you'll be able to see the penguins, right? If it were
I keep telling Dr. Bob I want to see the penguins, but he keeps reminding me that the penguins are off limits. You can't touch them or anything. And I said, Dr. Bob, I said, what if a penguin gets sick or something, and you guys need to take care of them? And he says, no, man, we can't touch them.
Hey, Tom, it's the same at the Peabody. You can't touch the ducks there either.
Yeah, I guess so. So, hey, Rich, I mean, this is going to be, I don't know if any other DXpedition in the world, in history, has ever done what we're going to try to do here.
No, not at all. No, and in fact, actually, so we're going to try to do live video and at least live audio, and I'm sure we can at least do live. The worst thing that we could do is live audio with some pre-recorded video,
pictures, sure.
or some pictures, right? That'll be the worst. We're going to try to do video though, and that would be just the ultimate. But we'll try it. I mean, we have unlimited airtime. We got enough gear, and as long as it works, we're going to do it. And I'm pretty darn confident, because I set them all up, and they're great pieces of gear, really excellent.
Well, let's see. I've got your site up here. If I can find the right mouse. Here, this is your VK0EK site, right?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you're doing this, because this is what I was going to do. So why don't you show it? I'll explain.
Okay, I'll just kind of, if you tell me slow down or go back or forth, I can do that. But guys, this is the if you go to vk0ek.org, this is the official site, I guess, for the Heard Island DXpedition. So that's what it looks like. And Rich, let me get your name off, and that'll give us a little bit more space there, maybe. Let's see. Let's try this.
Yeah.
So what do we got here? What are we looking at here?
Okay, so we have a real good friend in South Africa he's really into tracking whisper beacons. I don't know if you guys have ever had a show with Joe Taylor on it, in the whisper technology.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is very, very low power. And it's a digital mode that basically allows you to send data. And so there are a lot of enthusiasts in the ham radio community that like Whisper, WSPR. And there's a site, WhisperNet, I think, .com or .org, I can't remember.
.net.
Anyway, .net. There you go. So anyway, what's really interesting about this is this fellow actually has been using his tracker to track the Whisper beacon. We have a Whisper beacon on the ship, and so we have several people who have been tracking that for us. Now so let me explain something. We have another technology on board that allow people to track us. So maybe you want to, if you click on Track Us in that menu, I'll show you something else we're doing.
Track in the menu. Where's at the top?
Yeah,
scroll at the top here?
And it says Track Us.
Track Us right here, yeah.
Track Us, yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you click there, what you're going to end up seeing is, now this is a DeLorme, it's a Garmin, I guess they bought Garmin, and it's basically a commercial, Garmin tracker. And so basically what that does is it connects to a satellite and it puts out some data like once an hour. So you can actually see where they were and where they're going towards. And it's all well and good, and it's kind of neat, but it doesn't really give you a whole heck of a lot of data.
Well, there's not a lot out there either. Look, I mean, I zoomed back, and I can see they're out in the ocean there.
Oh, they're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's nothing. And now, let me show you one thing. Zoom into it again, and then you'll see in just a minute. Yeah, it's kind of... You'll see these little squares there. Click on one of those squares, probably the most recent one, the one towards the arrow. And what it'll do is give you a little information there. So I think they're joking around by saying they have gentle 18-foot swells.
18-foot waves, man, let me tell you. These guys are going into some tough area down there.
Yeah, now I know it can't be, and I don't know if they were kidding or not, but I know it can be pretty treacherous there. They're going into, they're definitely going into some of the most treacherous seas in the world. There's no doubt about it. Now, so this is the data you get off of this, and it's okay.
They're moving 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, 10 to 12 miles an hour. Yeah, they must be in waves if they were only going 10. They ramp up to a maximum speed of about 12 miles an hour. So we can't say they're sailing. They're steaming towards the island.
All right. So this is cool. We can see right where they are here. I mean, if the ship goes down and the dot stops right there, we know where it went down, right?
Yeah. Now let me show you another one though that's really interesting. Go back to the menu. Actually, just go back. And now you'll see over to the right it says Whisper Beacon, WSPR Beacon. So click there, and this shows all the people in the world who are tracking different beacons. And if you scroll down a little bit to south of Africa there, you'll end up seeing
let's see.
You might want to zoom in and then just pan the map. You can just grab it and pan it. Just pull it up. Yeah, and then you'll see.
Let's see. I can just slide the map, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm learning.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And so now, so you'll see that there's a couple guys in Africa that have been tracking the ship. Now they're not showing the Whisper Beacon on right at that minute, but what they do have is a database of data, and what they have in their data, and I'm not sure if you could see. Go to the top of the screen. They have a
top of the screen. All right, I need to get my producer here to do this. Top of the screen.
Yeah, somewhere. Okay, you see database. Click on database.
Yeah, all right.
Now,
is the beacon on 30 meters?
Yeah, it's on 30, but it has been on 40 as well. It kind of ping pong, and that's a good question because what they go to specify query parameters.
Kathy is laughing, I guess, at my controlling the system here. But
and then go to.
Oh, she's watching the video. Okay, I'm there.
Go to call and put this call in.
Okay.
ZS9 Zebra Sierra 9, and then Heard Island HI. So ZS9 HI. And somewhere there, So now, this shows you the last 24 hours what bands they were on. They were on 30 meters. At one time, they were on 40. And what they're doing is they're actually transmitting. So they're on HF sending CW, making contacts from the ship. And when they're not making contacts, they just plug the antenna into the Whisper Beacon, and that thing just goes and does its thing. Let me tell you why this is actually cooler than that Garmin technology. You'll see that it shows a grid square. It shows grid and R grid. Well, this is important for people who chase this one DX award. It's kind of an esoteric one, but some people love this stuff, and that is they chase an award trying to get boats that have been in every grid square, or people on land in every grid square in the world, and that's called the CQ DX Field Award, and that one is really pretty intense and pretty interesting. So, make a long story longer, let's go back to the so anyway, this has that data, and it also has data on how strong they were picked up, all the kind of data that hams really love. It's a lot more interesting than, say, the commercial Garmin thing. The commercial Garmin thing's nice, but this is kind of more fun. Now, if we take a look here, there you go, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
hey, Kathy, she's my producer. She's listening. She's watching the webcast right now. She's laughing crazy. Okay, she must be tuned into another channel because I know we're not doing anything that funny, but something's going on. Okay, all right. So where do we go here, Rich?
Okay, yeah. So go to that purple grid thing up there. I just wanted to show you because this very nice fellow Jan ZS6 BMN. We just added him to the team because he started doing this work for us and sending it to us. And I thought, oh my God, this is so good. I got to post it on our website. What he did was he tracked and actually was tracking with the Whisper beacon, and he made this map, and he showed where the boat was when they were making contacts with people and what grid square they were in, which is really awesome because I had a bunch of support tickets open up where people were saying, "Hey, Rich, do you know what grid square they're in?" I'm like, "How do I know? I'm in my office in San Francisco, and they're in a boat in the middle of the South Indian Ocean. Yeah. I don't know where they are." Well, I didn't know much about Whisper, but now I do, and now I'm a huge fan of it because with that Whisper beacon, we actually know where they were when they were making those contacts. So the guys that like to chase that award will get their data, and they can submit their cards and do whatever they got to do. But anyway, so I learned a lot. I mean, I didn't know much about this before, so I'm learning from our audience from the DXpedition. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Is there anything else on this page that
there's a couple other things. Let's see. Yeah, so he did another nice map. It just shows kind of relative to where they are. They're near where it says Prince Edward Island. They're just below that right now. And this is just an interesting map to show you basically when you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's a few other subantarctic islands, but that's about it. Now, luckily, the one that says Prince Edward Island, Crozet, and Kerguelen, those all have scientific bases on them. So if they did get in any trouble, they could steam towards one of those.
Yeah, they're only 1,000. They're only 1,000 miles away at 10 miles an hour.
Yeah,
that's about 100 hours to get there, maybe.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, let's see. Does that sound about right? I think that's about right. Yeah. And then so they're going to Heard Island, which has nothing on it. It's small. And now the good news is that if they did need to go somewhere, if there was an emergency or whatever, they could go from Heard to Kerguelen. Kerguelen's pretty close. It's like 200. I think it's around 200 miles. So they could get there in a day's time, no problem, right? So that's the good news. There's at least something nearby. But boy, yeah, talk about being out in the middle of nowhere.
You know what? That's kilometers. I was thinking that was miles. So the distances are a lot better there.
Yeah. So and so anyway, so this is the blog. I've been posting stuff, like how to get in the log, what to do, and this is the long book form. So maybe we'll go back up to the top and go back up to the menu. We can just show a few other little features of this website that are kind of cool. So go to Listen to Us. This is something you might like as well. What we did was, knowing that this Iridium, that we're paying for the Iridium sat phone, it's expensive. So what we do is if you click on any of those listens, you're going to hear Bob. What he does is he calls a number and it automatically pops up on this web page a recording. So it's like a phone recording machine that automatically pops up on the website. How do you like that?
That's
so
cool.
What that does is that allows him to give us a status report without costing a lot of money using the sat
it's like
phone.
a voicemail box kind of.
Exactly, yeah. And it goes right to the web. So that's that, and that's how I get some of my status reports. I've talked to him once yesterday, but I talked to the radio team leader since I'm mostly involved in the radio side, not the science side. Now, let's take one last. You go back, and I'll show you one last thing that's really cool. And this thing's about ready to pop open. Go to DXA. That we'll look at it real quick. We talked about it before on your show. DXA is an application.
Where is it?
Yeah, right in the middle there on the menu. Yeah. So this one is the application that allows DXers to see their QSO the minute they make them. So it's when we go on the air, not the QSOs that are being made from the boat, but when they're on land, they're going to fire up the BGAN terminals, and after you make your QSO, within 1 minute, you'll get a greenie that shows that you worked them on some band or mode. So it's a real-time logging server, and via satellite, everyone here that makes their QSO will know they're in the log, and that should cut down on DQRM and all kinds of other confusion. So that's that. I don't want to go into too much detail on that. We'll talk big time about that once the DXpedition starts. There's one last thing I want to show you that's really cool. This is something that's like an extra special bonus. You see there's the things that say buoy. Go to Argo buoys. So, okay, so the thing that, now go to where it says in the middle, it says preset regions, and click on Indian Ocean. Yeah, you'll see Indian. And then do remap. Click on remap. Okay, so we won't go into too much of this, but you see all these little stars. What are those? Okay, those are buoys. So NOAA, that's the National or Atmospheric NOAA, the weather guys. So NOAA and also this Woods Hole Institute, Oceanographic Institute up in, I believe, Maine, have this partnership where they put these special buoys that they actually have GPS on them. They have satellite. They actually can dive, and they take measurements of, all kinds of different things. And they send that data back. And so they're actually, they have, I don't know how many of these, they have a bunch of these things, like 10 buoys that they have been asked by NOAA to actually place in the ocean. So our DXpedition, while they're on their way, is helping NOAA and the Woods Hole Institute, Oceanographic Institute. So that's the kind of science they're doing. It's pretty darn cool. And one last thing that I think you'll really like on the menu. This is just to get people interested in going to this site and poking around, because there's a lot of good stuff on it. And the last one over there says weather, and you're going to like this if you've never seen this before. There's this really cool website called Windy TY.
Oh, I love it.
And what this shows you, and now what you could do is you could rotate the globe to wherever part of the world you want, and you could click on wind or temperature or waves, and you can now, while you're tracking them, you'll know what kind of waves they have. This is real time, right? So you'll know what kind of waves